Hey, what's up everybody, Platform Disciple here. I'm bringing you a custom card design video. These cards I've designed to kind of take advantage of the existing design space behind curse cards in Magic the Gathering. So quickly, we're going to talk about curses, what they are, and why I find them so fascinating as far as the game design goes. So curse cards are enchantment auras that have the subtype curse, and they enchant a player. And generally speaking, or I guess I should say really always at this point with the historical curse cards, put that player at a unique disadvantage. Now what makes curses extra special is they create a interesting multiplayer dynamic that other cards really can't. So to give you an idea here, cards that put all of your opponents at a disadvantage, although they may be more efficient than curse cards, don't spice up the multiplayer game. Whereas curse cards frequently put players at a disadvantage in a way that's unique by encouraging players to attack that player to gain a benefit for themselves. So I think that the designers of Commander are already kind of aware of that. They've made some curses in their newer decks that really capitalize on that multiplayer aspect. Like, I'm going to just give an example here, which is Curse of Disturbance, which when that player is enchanted, whenever enchanted player is attacked, you create a 2/2 zombie token, and each opponent attacking that player does the same, which means that, let's say there are 3 people at the table, me, player 1, and player 2. If I have enchanted player 1 and player 2 attacks player 1, both me and player 2 get a zombie. So that's interesting because it encourages player 2 to attack player 1 as opposed to me, because they're going to get a small advantage for it. That being said, historically curse cards I think are kind of the first ones that get cut from the pre-con commander decks because, like I mentioned just a second ago, they're not as efficient at winning the game because of the fact that they don't put every player other than you at the table at a disadvantage. They give a lot of power to your opponents. And in addition to that, they're very slow. They're incremental value. The last kind of big thing is that if you put it on a player, that player is going to die, and then you lose that kind of value resource. So they're a little awkward. In addition to that, the curses really struggle when it comes to deck synergy. The decks that they're in don't really capitalize on the curses in meaningful ways. So I would like to see a commander that can capitalize on curses in a new, interesting way. Which leads us into our next point, which is that curses in their current form are hard to take advantage of in Commander because of color identity. Curses are kind of spread relatively evenly across all colors. Now, admittedly, you could just put like 1 or 2 curses in your deck, but that's just not as interesting as having a curse deck. And if you're running a 5-color, 4-color, or 3-color deck, there isn't enough support for curses themselves to really justify putting those curses in your deck. So it'd be interesting to see a commander that encourages that kind of play. So that's what I've designed here, is 5 cards that are going to create a commander deck that makes curses a strategy where you want to have a lot of curses in your deck. And of course, the first thing to talk about is the commander. One thing you might be concerned about is, well, curses, because there's so many colors, you'd have to have a 5-color commander to use them all. And why does it really make sense to have a 5-color commander for curses? And the answer, I think, is no. But what I've done is I'm capitalizing on potential design space that hasn't been taken advantage of yet. But Commander has historically been a format where Wizards of the Coast has put some cards that have kind of pushed the existing boundaries a little further each time. Like, they have created Planeswalkers with the line of text, can be your commander. They've created partner commanders. So point is, there is room to experiment with commanders as something that can be designed around. So let's talk about Jazzlaw, Curse Connoisseur. So Jazzlaw is 4 mana. He's a 2/3. Of course, he's a legendary creature, human shaman, so you can use it as your commander. He has the Eminence effect, which is as long as Jazzlaw is in the command zone or on the battlefield, you may spend mana as though it were any color to cast curse spells. Which seems interesting, but of course now you're probably saying he's mono black, so that doesn't matter because you can't include those cards in your deck anyways. But he does also have the line of text. You may include any curse card in your deck regardless of its color identity if Jazzlaw is your commander. That is kind of what I was talking about pushing the bounds, pushing the boundaries. That hasn't been done yet, but I don't think it's outside the realm of possibility. I think that as far as like the game design goes, it's possible. But the current problem would be that I don't think Wizards of the Coast wants to print a deck that has cards in it that you can't play if Jazzlaw is not your commander. Historically, they've been creating commander decks that have kind of the switch in and out option where you can swap between some commanders, and Jazzlaw is the only card that currently enables this sort of deck. So it's unlikely to get printed or anything like this to get printed in an official capacity, but I think it's something that you could play with at your own playgroup if everybody clears it as being okay to play with a custom card. And of course, the last kind of biggest effect that Jazzlaw has is that when he enters the battlefield, you return each curse card from your graveyard to the battlefield. Because the first couple of effects he has are just to enable you to play the deck, and then the enter the battlefield, recur all your curses is to make it so he's actually worth playing, because you can already play a deck that has every existing curse in it by just playing a 5-color commander, but it's not surprising to hear that that deck would be very bad because there aren't enough synergies between curses to really do that. You'd just be kind of running a random garbage pile. So what returning the curses to the battlefield really does is it patches up one of the weaknesses curses have, which is that when the cursed player dies, you lose that curse. Which is problematic if you're building a deck around curses, because presumably the player you're cursing is the one you're trying to kill. So yeah, it's nice to be able to get those curses back. I think there are other effects that could encourage you to build a curse deck. So if you have any ideas, I would like to hear them in the comments. But for the sake of this video, I'm going to continue talking about the card that I have designed, the existing design space that I'm talking about. So are there balance problems with Jazzlaw is the question. Being able to include every curse in your deck is not a balance problem. We've already said that you can do that already. It's just bad. So the real question is being able to recur your curses, is that a balance problem? So historically, cards that reanimate other cards are problematic because they allow you to get a card that is supposed to enter the battlefield very late in the game out extremely early. Which is part of the reason I've put Jazzlaw at 4 mana instead of something like 2 mana, because you want to kind of buffer that as much as you can within reason. Like, I think he could even be 5 mana, but then you get into the realms of him just not feeling good to play. So there's 2 ways that Jazzlaw can be manipulated. One is to try to get the biggest, fattest curse into your graveyard very early, or as many curses as you can into your graveyard early. And that's what could be scary. The biggest curse is Overwhelming Splendor, which undeniably, if you got this out on turn 4, that's a pretty big hit to that player who you put it on. That being said, because Jazzlaw is locked in this commander design space, it's going to be a multiplayer game, and curses intrinsically target only one player. So even if you get the biggest curse out, Overwhelming Splendor, very early, you're playing multiplayer. So you're not going to be creating an unwinnable game state. You might be creating an unpleasant game state, but that is really depends on your playgroup. There are definitely much more toxic effects in Commander than getting overwhelming splendored. So it really depends on your preference. I think it's within reason. That being said, the other kind of question is, what if you manage to get a ton of curses in your graveyard very early? Like by turn 4, let's say I get 3, 4, or 5 curses. That gets a little scary, but once again, I think the multiplayer aspect kind of balances it out. You have to work pretty hard to get those curses in your graveyard. So I think that if you're going to work to try to do that, that payoff is okay. The big reason that I have this effect is not to ramp out the curses early with self-mill. It's actually to make it so when you have taken one player out of the game and their curses fall off, that you have the opportunity to get those curses back. Because that has been one of the kind of biggest issues with curse cards historically, if you were going to build a curse deck, is that in your dream scenario where you have 3 or 4 or 5 curses on the battlefield, somebody's probably going to die and then you lose all your value. So you need a card that's going to help you kind of recuperate after a player dies at the table. So yeah, the other big thing to talk about is just that Reanimator decks already exist in Commander, and having a really, really big creature like Vorinclex or Jin-Gitaxias come out very early is way, way more of a kind of concern, like balance problem, than getting something like Curses out early. So I think it's safe to say that even if some of you might think that this effect is strong or too strong, it's still within the boundaries of what is already possible in Commander and doesn't really break any existing strategies. It's not like you're going to see really anything unusual popping up in other decks, because this deck, because Jazzlaw only functions really as your commander and only if you have curses in your deck, all of those problems that he might introduce are contained within this strategy, which I think is good. So yeah, he's cool. But I would like to see more cards that revolve around curses. So I've designed a small handful of other ones here that I'm going to quickly go over. The next one is Burden of Misfortune, which is 2 colorless and 2 black. And of course, it is a curse. That being said, keep in mind that the 2 colors, 2 black technically doesn't really affect Jazzlaw. None of the mana cost color effects affect Jazzlaw, but I went with that cost because the card most closely resembles Phyrexian Arena. This card needed to be slightly more expensive than that, or it'd be almost basically in every situation a strictly better Phyrexian Arena. So what does Burden of Misfortune do? You enchant a player, and at the beginning of the enchanted player's upkeep, that player draws X cards and loses X life, where X is equal to the number of curses attached to them. So this card's super special because it's the only curse that exists right now that encourages you to curse yourself. So you can either put Burden of Misfortune on yourself and it functions basically just like Phyrexian Arena, or you can put it on your opponent and it functions most closely to Curse of Thirst, which is going to rapidly kill a player if they have a lot of curses on them. But there's 2 more interesting things about this. One is that you can use it as a political move where you're putting on a player without the intention of killing them. You're just giving them a Phyrexian Arena, which is interesting for Commander. I don't think it fits most people's playstyle, but being able to make a big move where you say, here's a Phyrexian Arena, do this for me, like, political game, is interesting. And the other interesting thing is that you can continue to curse yourself after you've put Burden of Misfortune on yourself. So you could, if you wanted to, put Burden of Misfortune on yourself and it's Phyrexian Arena, and then every curse you put on yourself from there on out functions basically like an additional Phyrexian Arena. I don't know whether or not this causes really balance problems. It's certainly very interesting because curses do put you at an inherent disadvantage. And there is definitely a limit on the number of curses you can put on yourself before you start doing more damage to yourself than good. So I like the card. I'm hoping that you guys have some feedback on this one. This is kind of one of the more, I guess, high variance in terms of how much it can impact a game. So I'd like to hear everybody's opinion on it. The next curse is one that is very special for having a curse deck in a multiplayer game. And that's Curse of Ill Omens, which is 1 black mana right now. It could probably be more, and I want to hear people's feedback. But I kept it at 1 black mana because the card technically doesn't do anything, sort of, as far as you are concerned. But what it does is you enchant a player. And whenever the enchanted player attacks one of your opponents with 1 or more creatures, they may move Curse of Ill Omens to that opponent. So the curse is on a player, and that player can get rid of it by attacking another player and move it to them. But it does it specifies opponent, so they can't move it to you. Likewise, if a player attacks the player who's cursed with Curse of Ill Omens, then that player may move a curse attached to them to the enchanted player, the player who's enchanted with Curse of Ill Omens. So what you've done is you've created a situation where curses can now move around. They can never come back to you, but you're allowing players to get rid of their curses provided that they are not attacking you. So you've got a card that is relatively cheap, that all it does is make you the least advantageous player to attack the table. But the irony of curse is that all of the curses that are coming out that are bouncing around, you're the source of them. It's just that players might lose sight of where the problem's actually coming from when they see that they can get rid of their curses easily by attacking another player. It is worth noting that because it's worded as attack with 1 or more creatures, you can only move 1 curse at a time. So it's not like you're going to have a player attack with 10 creatures and then dump all of their curses on another player, but you will see some more interesting multiplayer dynamics with this card, I think. Okay, and then one kind of big thing to think about is that because curses frequently trigger off of players attacking, it's important that this deck has some creatures to attack with. And I would like those creatures, of course, to come back to the curse theme. These 2 cards are pretty powerful, so I do want to hear your opinion on them. This one is Midnight Wanderer, which is 1 black mana for a 1/1 with Death Touch. It most closely resembles Goblin Lackey, because when it deals combat damage to a player, you may put a curse card from your hand on the battlefield attached to that player. So when you attack a player, they have a choice to make. They can either block the 1/1 with Death Touch, and their creature dies, or they can take the hit and they risk a curse coming out from your hand onto the battlefield attached to them. So let's kind of talk about it, because this one is another free card effect where you're playing something that's potentially very big, like Overwhelming Splendor, for very low mana cost. But the thing to keep in mind is that curses are such an underwhelming strategy on their own that having cards that are super powerful that support that strategy are not necessarily like game breaking. It can also just be blocked. There are 1/1s with Death Touch that exist. None of them have quite as explosive of an effect, but the only card that can come out of your hand has to be a curse card, and you have to have enough curses in your deck to capitalize on that effect. So basically, the card is, I think, overpowered, but only if you have at least 10 curses in your deck, which makes your deck weaker. So I'm hoping that balances itself out, but let me know what you think. I do think the card could maybe be bumped to 2 mana, but as you increase the mana cost of this card, it undeniably gets a lot weaker. And then the last card is Unwanted Sympathizer, which most closely resembles Bloodghast. And Bloodghast is a historically very powerful card, but once again, this card is only supported by curse decks, so I think that it is within reasonable power limits. It's 2 black mana for a 2/1 creature, and it can't block like Bloodghast, And whenever a curse enters the battlefield under your control, you may return Unwanted Sympathizer from your graveyard to the battlefield. If you do, it gains haste until the end of the turn. So I like this card because one of the issues the deck might have is that when you flood your deck with a lot of curses that require you to attack a player, you're removing deck slots for creatures that are actually going to do the attacking. Like in a typical deck, if you have 99 cards and you have put in 20 curse cards, then there's 20 cards amongst your cards that you can actually put in that cannot be creatures. So this card allows you to have smaller number of creatures because it's going to come back continually and provide that kind of little value that you get for attacking a player. So yeah, those are the 5 cards I have designed. I also have a full deck list, and I may make a deck tech video if everybody likes this video. So let me know if you want to see that. And yeah, I'm looking forward to hearing your feedback. Until next time, peace out.